Welcome to Fishtrap Reads. My name is Mike Midlow. This winter, we are celebrating a great work of literature together as a community. It's been a book club favorite for years, The Jump Off Creek by Molly Gloss. It's a story of a homesteader and her struggles to settle in the mountains of Oregon. Pick up a copy and join along. This week's special program is presented by the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center in Baker City, and is one of many we're offering during Fishtrap Reads to help us all gain a deeper understanding of the life of an Oregon homesteader. Recordings of these events are available at fishtrap.org and on Fishtrap's YouTube channel. Try to check that out so you can watch them anytime in your classroom, at your library, with your book club, and around the dinner table with your family. Before we get going, I want to say thanks to our Fishtrap Reads sponsors, the Book Loft, Community Bank, Oregon Arts Commission, and Pacific Power Foundation. Okay, let's get to it. Today's special event is titled Elizabeth on the Frontier. You're about to take a step back in time and learn about a day in the life of a woman on her homestead. You'll visit with Elizabeth as she unpacks her wagon and finds that things are not going exactly as she expected. Elizabeth is played by Ranger Cheri Lonborg from the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. When Cheri was a little girl, her grandmother would tell her how their ancestors traveled the Oregon Trail in 1848 and how one of them picked up and kept an ox shoe that she still has to this day. Her character is Elizabeth and is based on one of Cheri's ancestors who traveled on the Oregon Trail. Welcome, Cheri.
Well, hello, folks. You must be one of our neighbors from down the hillside. It's good to see you. I'm sure that you don't know me. I've not met you before, but I would love to get to know you folks, and I've been trying to get to know many of them in this area. My name is Elizabeth Trellinger, and I've only been here a few months now. Maybe I'd better start at the beginning and tell you about my husband and I, our Daniel, our journey to the west here. This started, I think it's been probably about a year ago, back in Iowa. And we had a nice little farm back there. I was so happy. But Daniel, he said it was getting too crowded. The farm was too small. He wanted something bigger. He wanted a homestead. So we decided to come west. Well, that was quite an adventure, just getting ready for the journey. We sold the farm. We did keep our oxen and our wagon that we had. And we figured that probably the amount of money that we received from the farm would be plenty enough for the supplies that we would need for the journey. So the only thing that I requested from my husband, Daniel, was this rocker here. This is very, very special to me. And like I said, we sold everything else. My papa, he made this rocker before I even got married to Daniel. It was a wedding present. Will always be in my heart. Well, he was making it. It's quite cute, the little story about it. He kept on going out to the barn every evening after supper. And I asked my mama about it, and she didn't say anything. She just kind of had a little funny look on her face. So one day I decided I was going to follow him and see what he was doing. So I followed him out there, and I found a little peephole. And I looked through that peephole, and there was my papa. He was sanding away on this rocker. It just touched me so. So anyway, this rocker was a wedding present for Daniel and I have carried it with me wherever we have gone. And I told Daniel, I won't be setting foot off of this farm unless this rocker is coming with me. So he made room in the wagon, and we put it in the wagon, and off we went. Well, it was a little bit of a journey to get to the Missouri River. It probably took us about 2 or 3 weeks to get there. The traveling was fair. It was a little bit rainy, but we got to St. Joseph, and all the people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were gathering there to cross over the river. We had to wait our turn. We got over the river, and we gathered with a bunch of people that were forming a wagon train. We found some mighty nice people, and they said, yes, come join us. So we joined the wagon train, and off we went. We went up north, kind of a northwest, until we hit the Platte River. And we followed that Platte River all the way down. And it was pretty uneventful. The weather was a little bit rainy, muddy, and a little bit of hailstones, but it wasn't too bad. It started to get warmer as we went west. And then we came to Fort Laramie. And this is when things went terribly, terribly wrong. We were crossing over the river, and Daniel was out there with the oxen and the wagon, and I was standing on the shore, and all of a sudden something wasn't right. The wagon started tipping, and pretty soon it started tipping more. And then Daniel just went out of sight underneath the water. He got sucked underneath. The wagon was stuck in quicksand. I screamed, and the menfolk come running. They saw what happened. They ran out in the water as fast as they could, but they were too late. Daniel had drowned. This all happened within just seconds. And all of a sudden, I was a widow. I just sat on the ground crying. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to feel. So after a few days, we buried Daniel there. I have his coat to this day. That's the only thing I have left. Anyway, as I said, we traveled on. I was pretty much in a daze at that time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was going. We made it to LeGrand, almost our destination. And I got to looking at those blue mountains, and I just didn't have it in me to get up over those blue mountains. One more challenge. I just couldn't go on. So I decided to stay there in LeGrand. It was a nice little town. I was able to sell the wagon and the oxen and got a fair amount of money. And I thought, well, let me look around here. Let me look and see what is available here. And I got to talking to the fellow at the mercantile, and he said, well, you know what? I think that there is a little homestead kind of up on the hillside, just outside of this little town called, what was it called? Sumner? Or, no, I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, I thought, well, maybe that is what I need to do. Maybe I need to fulfill the dream that Daniel and I had together. So I thought, okay, all right. And I asked him a little bit about it. And he said, well, it's not much of a cabin. It's just on the hillside there, not too far up in the mountains. And there's some cattle that come with it. He said they're kind of running wild, but there are cattle. The fellow that owned it before, he homesteaded on it, but he had a clear title to it, and then he just disappeared. Nobody knew where he went to. Well, I thought the price was right. I think I can do this. So I purchased that deed. I had my own homestead at last. Now getting to it was another story. So I had enough money. I went and I found two beautiful mules. One was a little on the old side, but he had good eyes. The other one was a nice young mule, good and strong, and I thought he will be good to ride on. And I also purchased a couple of goats. I thought, I know goats. We had goats back home on the farm. I can milk them. I can make butter, and I've always wanted to make cheese. So I thought, I can do this. I bought a few provisions and I packed up my mules and I headed out. I got to this other little town, and I stayed there with some folks that said, you are welcome, come stay with us. Your homestead is kind of up on the hillside up there. And they gave me directions on what creek and what trail to follow. So the next morning I got up before the sun was even up, and I packed up my mules, got my goats. They weren't very happy. It was rather rainy and cold, and they just really wanted to snuggle down and stay there. Well, we went off all by ourselves. It was somewhat scary to be all alone. I always had the wagon train that I could count on the menfolk. But here I was out in this open valley with no one else. Well, I got to the hillside. I saw the trail and I thought, okay, Elizabeth, you can do this. You are a strong woman. You can do this. I headed up that trail and things just, after a couple hours, it just didn't seem right. I thought, I hope I'm not lost. And I kept going and kept going. And pretty soon I saw this little trickle of smoke up on the hillside. And I thought, well, that's got to be a fire. At least someone else alive is up here on the hillside. So I followed it and pretty soon I could smell it. And I thought, well, I'm getting closer, getting closer. Then I could smell a fresh pot of hot coffee brewing. And I thought, oh, I hadn't eaten anything all day long and my stomach started growling. So pretty soon I saw a fellow and he was sitting down there hunkered beside the fire and he was drinking his coffee. And I helloed the camp and he looked up and he had the funniest look on his face, like he was looking at a ghost or something. And I come riding up and he said, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "Excuse me." "Oh, I better introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Trillinger, and I just purchased the homestead up here somewhere off of this creek somewhere. And so, what was it called? Jump Off Creek. And I could not find it." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you are way off track." And I thought, no. And I didn't know what to do. I said, "Well, can you help me? Can you show me the way?" And he said, "I'll do better than that. I've got a few cattle out here that I'm heading down that direction. Why don't you follow me and I'll take you right to where the creek is. And you just have to go a little ways further and your cabin is right there." And so off we went in the drizzling rain. And we're riding along and pretty soon we come to this creek. And he said, "Okay, Elizabeth, all you need to do is head this way. Don't deviate, but if you happen to think that you're lost, just turn around and follow the creek back down and it'll take you clear down off of the mountain." And so I said, "Okay, thank you." His name was Mr. Taylor. I will never forget him. He took the fear out of my heart. That was very, very special, and a good cup of coffee. So off I went, and pretty soon after an hour or two, I came to my home. It's not big, but it's mine. And so I unpacked. I was so tired, so tired. I unpacked everything and I just threw it on the dirt floor inside of my home. There were holes in the roof. The chinking had fallen out between the logs. There was mice running all over the place. Oh, it was a mess, but it was mine. And I was so exhausted. There was a little tiny bed stand up against the wall. And so I just laid down and fell asleep. I figured, well, tomorrow's another day. I'll handle it then. So the next morning I got up, and of course my goats were not happy at all. They needed to be milked. And so I found a couple jars inside of my supplies and I went out and I milked the goats. And I thought, well, this is very nice, actually, because the creek is right down below the house. I could just take these jars and I can just set them down in the creek. And I've got all the milk that I would ever need. I can get to it and start making some butter. And I have flour, I have cornmeal, and I have my coffee. That's all I really need. And so I milked the goats and I took the milk down to the creek and put it in the creek so it would get nice and cold. Anyway, and I went back up and started taking a look at my new home. Oh, it had a lot of work to do on it, but I had nothing else to do. So I looked around and I found myself a bucket full of nails. And I also found an axe. And I thought, okay, Elizabeth, you've done this work before, you can do it again. And so I went and got some wood and some mud, and I started chinking up my cabin and working on the roof and covering up the holes in it so that I wouldn't have mud floor instead of dirt. And pretty soon it was done. And then the sun came out and it was so nice and warm. And lo and behold, a visitor was coming up the hillside. And I looked, Mr. Taylor, he was coming up. He actually had a couple of my cattle that were roaming with his out in the wild. And he brought them up, and oh, I was so thankful. And he come in and set a spell, and we talked a little bit, and he told me a little bit about himself, how he was quite a good cook and he really liked to do that. So he said, I make a pretty good dried apple pie. I'll have to bring you one someday. And I went down to the creek and I got him a jar of nice cold goat's milk. And oh, he said that was so delightful. So anyway, we visited for a while and he had to move on, but I thanked him greatly. And then pretty soon weeks went by and I didn't see him at all. And I got a little bit worried. And I had been having some problems. The wolves kept coming up and trying to get my goats, but I had put up a pretty good brush fence around them, and I built a little bit of a lean-to so that they would get out of the weather. But this hillside was kind of hard to work with. It was a hillside with this cabin built on it. So it was a challenge. Anyway, I and the animals both had a bear come in one night, and that bear caused a ruckus, and my goats were running all around, and the poor mules, they were just making a ruckus and kicking around, and I didn't know what to do. I have a gun that was Daniel's, but I really have never shot it before. I've never had to. So I was unsure about doing that, it being a bear and all. I didn't know what the bear was going to do, maybe come after me too. Well, I just let it be, and I went back in my cabin and shut the door. The animals were okay. Well, anyway, not too long after that, as I said, Mr. Taylor showed up, and he started talking about this bear and how it had bothered them down in their homestead that they had. It had come in and was trying to kill the young calves that were being born. And so they went tracking after it. And he was really in an upset at the time when he was telling me this. And I said, well, what happened? And his partner, his ranching partner, and him had gone out after this bear. Well, evidently they tracked it down, and the thing turned on him, come running right in behind him, and it attacked his, I think, let's see, his partner's, Blue is his partner's name, attacked him and just jumped on his back and tore up his back, something fierce. Well, he said, Elizabeth, I need your help. I don't know what to do. And I said, okay. And so I got on my mule and I got my bag that had some medicines in it and some needles and thread. And we went on down. It took us quite some time to get down the mountain to their homestead. And I came in and oh my, I started to shake. His back looked something terrible, the way that bear, they had killed the bear, which was a good relief. But it had torn up poor Blue's back, something fierce. And so I went to working on it. I cleaned it real good and I sewed it up. Well, and it just was going to take some time to heal, which it eventually did. So I went back home and went back to work and talked to a few of the other homesteaders around and talked to them about possibly trading some of my goat's milk and some of my butter for other items that I might need, that they might have. And we could trade, or perhaps I could make a little money on the side so that when I go back to LeGrand, I can get supplies before next winter. And they were very happy to hear. Most of them had never had a goat, so they didn't know anything about it. And I thought, well, maybe if some of these ranchers down here have some sheep, I could get some wool from them, and I could at least do some knitting and make the different things that I need. And so that's what we've been doing. And I've been just rattling on here. I haven't heard anything from you folks. And I hope that you can come up here and visit with me more often. Perhaps I can come down when the weather's a little bit nicer and visit with you folks. And I will always bring many jars of the goat's milk that I have. But I would love to trade with you if there's any supplies that you have for goat's milk in the future. And oh my goodness, I see Mr. Taylor coming up the hill. Let's see what he has to say.
Ma'am.
Well, hi, Mr. Taylor.
Ms. Trilling, one of them wolfers shot one of your cattle again.
Oh, no.
I think we need to go down and take a look at it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. What are we going to do about it?
Well, we're gonna have to get that one cleaned up before everything else gets on it, but I think you need to saddle a mule, come with me.
Okay. I'm sorry, folks. I'm going to have to leave. But you write me if you can. I get very few letters, very few chances to get down to see if I have any letters, but I would love to hear more from you folks. I need to go now. So I hope that you folks have a safe journey down the mountainside.
If you have questions for Elizabeth or Ranger Cheri, write her a letter. What a story about being on Jump Off Creek. She loves writing back. You can write to Elizabeth at the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, 22267 Oregon Highway 86, Baker City, Oregon, 97814. Join us next Wednesday at noon, where you'll get to visit with Ranger Casey, who will give us a look inside a Frontier Fur Trapper's cabin. You can take it in at fishtrap.org or on Fishtrap's YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for joining us for this special Fishtrap Reads event. Learn more at fishtrap.org.